He was not a priest. He was not an ordained missionary. He had no impressive titles or extraordinary abilities. In fact, his body was so frail that the Jesuits deemed him too weak to follow the religious vocation he had so long dreamed of. But this man, rejected by men, was chosen by God for something greater. He crossed the Atlantic Ocean, endured unimaginable torture, and died blessing those who killed him. His name was René Goupil, and his story will prove to you that holiness does not require perfection, only a heart willing to love until the end. Prepare yourself to learn about the saint who should never have been, but who forever changed the history of faith in America. The biting wind swept along the banks of the Mohawk River, carrying with it the smell of smoke from the fires and the distant murmur of voices in the Iroquois tongue. It was the autumn of 1642, and the forests of what we now know as New York were beginning to trade their green leaves for the golden and crimson hues that announced the arrival of winter. There, amidst a village surrounded by rough wooden palisades, a frail man with delicate hands, hands that healed, not hands that hurt, awaited his fate with a serenity that disconcerted even his fiercest captors. René Goupil was not a warrior. He wore no armor, wielded no sword, and had not been trained for battle. He was simply a medic, a surgeon of modest education, a man who had left behind the narrow, safe streets of his native France to follow a calling that few understood. His small body had been marked by the privations of the journey across the Atlantic Ocean, by months of hunger in the Jesuit missions, by the penetrating cold of the Canadian winters. His hands, which he had once dreamed of consecrating as a Jesuit, but which frail health had prevented him from formally offering, now trembled, not from fear, but from a faith so intense it burned like an ember in his chest. How had he come to this place? How did a young man born in Anjou, a region of green fields and peaceful villages, end up a prisoner of Iroquois warriors in the wild lands of the New World? The answer was written not in academic scrolls or glorious chronicles, but in the small choices of a heart too generous to settle for a comfortable life. In that moment, as the sun began to descend on the horizon, staining the sky with shades of orange and purple, René felt the weight of the invisible chains that bound him, not the ropes that had tied his wrists in the first days of captivity, but the bonds of a love he had freely chosen, love for Christ, love for the sick he had served, love even for those who were now planning his death. The air was heavy with the tension that precedes great events. The Iroquois warriors, tall and imposing men, painted with the symbols of their conquests, watched the French prisoner with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. To them, René represented something strange and dangerous, a man who did not fear death, who did not beg for mercy, who insisted on making mysterious gestures over children and the sick. They had tortured his body, mutilated his fingers, humiliated his human dignity, but they could not break something that seemed to reside deeper than flesh and bones. The Iroquois village was buzzing with preparations for the nighttime council. Fires were lit, creating circles of orange light that danced against the growing darkness. The smell of roasting meat mixed with the acrid odor of burning wood. Women moved among the longhouses, weaving baskets and preparing food, while children ran among the shadows, their laughter echoing incongruously with the heavy atmosphere hanging over the camp. René watched all this with eyes that had learned to see beyond appearances. In the same hands that tortured him, he saw the hands of human beings created in the image of God. In the faces painted for war, he saw the faces of souls who had not yet known the light of the gospel. And therein lay his greatest pain. Not the physical pain of the blows and wounds, but the spiritual ache of knowing there was so much love to share and so little time to do it. Beside him, also a prisoner, was Father Isaac Jogues, a man whose courage and faith had become legendary among the missionaries of New France. Together, they had traveled hundreds of miles through the dense forests, shared crumbs of bread when hunger threatened to overcome them, and prayed under the stars when exhaustion seemed unbearable. Between them, a friendship forged in the fire of the mission had formed, a brotherhood that transcended differences in education and status. The story that is about to unfold is not just the history of a martyrdom. It is the story of how an ordinary man, without impressive titles or extraordinary abilities, discovered that true greatness lies not in what we do, but in whom we choose to love. It is the story of how a generous heart can change the course of history, even when the surrounding world seems dominated by violence and incomprehension. On that September night in 1642, as the stars began to dot the dark sky above the American forests, René Goupil did not know that he was about to become the first Christian martyr of those lands that would one day be called New York. He did not know that his name would be remembered for centuries, that churches would be dedicated to his memory, that generations of nurses and health professionals would invoke him as their patron. He knew only one thing, with the certainty that comes from the deepest faith, that everything he had lived through, every moment of pain and every instance of joy, had been preparation for this final moment. And so, with the smell of smoke from the fires filling the air, with the sound of drums beginning to echo in the night, with the autumn chill biting his already wounded skin, René Goupil prepared to make his final offering, not with fear, but with the peace of one who knows he is fulfilling the noblest purpose a human being can embrace, witnessing to God's love to the very last consequence. René was born in 1608 in Anjou, a region in western France known for its fertile fields, generous vineyards, and tranquil rivers that meandered between gentle hills. It was a time when Europe was still healing the wounds of religious wars, when Catholics and Protestants had turned the continent into a battlefield. But in Anjou, in the modest homes of artisans and small merchants, life proceeded with the regularity of the seasons. The Goupil family was neither wealthy nor noble. The father worked as an artisan, probably a carpenter or local merchant, a man with calloused hands and a back bent from honest labor. The mother, like many women of that era, divided her time between caring for the home, raising the children, and assisting with tasks that ensured the family's livelihood. René grew up in an environment of simple but deep faith, where the sound of church bells marked the rhythm of the days and nightly prayers around the table were as essential as bread. From an early age, René showed himself to be different from the other children. While the village boys ran through the fields, competing to see who could climb trees fastest or throw stones farthest, René preferred to observe. His large, dark eyes seemed to absorb every detail of the world around him. The flight of birds, the movement of clouds, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves of the trees. There was a sensitivity in him that made him simultaneously frail and extraordinarily perceptive. When an animal was injured or a child was hurt during play, it was René who approached first, with careful gestures and gentle words. His small hands seemed born to heal, to relieve, to console. His mother watched, with a mixture of pride and worry. Pride for having such a kind son, worry for knowing that the world is not always generous toward sensitive hearts. As he grew older, René began attending the classes offered by the local church. It was there, between cold stone walls and the smell of incense, that he discovered the world of letters and numbers. He learned to read Latin, memorized passages from Scripture, and heard stories of the saints and martyrs who had given their lives for the faith. Each story lit a flame in his heart that grew day after day. The Jesuits, a religious order founded by Saint Ignatius of Loyola less than a century earlier, were expanding rapidly in France. They were known for their rigorous education, their spiritual discipline, and above all, their missions to the ends of the earth. René listened with fascination to stories about Jesuits who sailed to distant lands, learned exotic languages, and carried the gospel to peoples who had never heard the name of Christ. In his adolescent heart, a dream began to germinate: to become a Jesuit, to dedicate his life completely to God and to the neediest. When he turned 16, René made the decision that would change his life. He communicated his desire to join the Society of Jesus to his family. His mother wept, as all mothers weep when they realize their children have grown up and chosen paths that will take them far away. His father, a man of few words, simply placed his hand on his son's shoulder and nodded gravely. If it was God's will, who were they to prevent it? René entered the Jesuit novitiate with the enthusiasm characteristic of passionate youth. There, in the silence of the cloisters and the discipline of Saint Ignatius's spiritual exercises, he sought to mold himself into the perfect instrument for the divine will. He woke before dawn for prayers, studied philosophy and theology, and practiced obedience and humility. His desire was to completely consume himself in the service of God. But it was during this period that René began to face his first great challenge. His body, always delicate, started showing signs of weakness. Unexplained fevers often struck him. Pains in his chest left him breathless. The Jesuit superiors, men experienced in discerning vocations, watched with concern. The life of a Jesuit demanded physical vigor, especially for those destined for foreign missions. Would René be able to endure the trials that would surely come? The answer came painfully. After years of formation, the superiors made the difficult decision. René would not be ordained a priest. His frail health did not permit him to follow the complete path of priestly ordination. It was a devastating blow to the young man who had invested so much of himself in that dream. Imagine the scene: René, now just over 20 years old, sitting in a simple cell in the novitiate, receiving the news that shattered his deepest dream. The tears that rolled down his face were not of revolt or bitterness, but of a pure pain. The pain of someone who sees the chosen path closing before them. He had prayed so much, desired so much, prepared so much, and now everything seemed to be falling apart. But it was in this moment of apparent defeat that René learned one of the most important lessons of his life. God wastes no tear, no disappointment, no broken dream. Everything can be transformed, everything can gain new meaning. Leaving the Jesuit novitiate did not mean abandoning his faith or his desire to serve. René simply had to learn to rewrite his story in a different way. If he could not be a priest, he would be a healer. If he could not consecrate the hosts, he would consecrate his hands to the care of the sick. With this renewed determination, René turned to the study of medicine and surgery. In 17th century France, medicine was as much an art as a science. There were no antibiotics, no modern anesthesia, none of the resources we now consider basic. Physicians relied on knowledge passed down through generations, careful observation of symptoms, and natural herbs and preparations. René dove into these studies with the same intensity he had dedicated to religious life. He learned anatomy by studying drawings and, when possible, observing autopsies. He memorized the properties of hundreds of medicinal plants: valerian to calm, chamomile to relieve pain, mint for digestive issues. He practiced bloodletting, a common technique at the time, to balance the body's humors. He learned how to perform sutures, treat wounds, and identify the signs of serious diseases. But more than techniques, René learned something that many doctors never master: the art of compassion. To him, every patient was not just a collection of symptoms to be treated, but a precious soul before God. When he bent over a sickbed, his hands touched with reverence, as if he were touching Christ, suffering himself. Years passed, and René established himself as a surgeon and medic in Orleans. a vibrant city on the banks of the Loire River. There, among narrow streets and stone houses, he built a reputation for competence and kindness. The poor knew they could seek him out even without money. Mothers brought their sick children knowing they would be received with patience. The elderly found in him not only treatment, but a comforting presence. It was a useful life, a life of service. René could have been content with this, grown old, respected in his community, and been buried with honors in a French cemetery. But in his heart, that old flame still burned, that desire to give more, to go further, to surrender himself completely. It was then, in 1639, that René heard about the Jesuit missions in New France. Stories arrived through letters and reports. Jesuits entering immense forests, learning languages never before written down, baptizing entire peoples, and facing unimaginable dangers to bring the gospel. And these missions desperately needed help. They needed men who knew how to care for the sick, who could treat wounds, who could serve as support for the missionaries. René read and reread those letters until the words were engraved upon his heart. There was the answer. He would not be an ordained Jesuit, but he could serve the Jesuits. He would not preach sermons, but his hands would speak of love through care. He would not celebrate Mass, but every bandage, every gesture of consolation would be his offering to God. The decision was made. René would sell everything he owned, leave behind the safety of Orleans, and cross the Atlantic Ocean toward the unknown. He was 32 years old, his health still fragile, with no guarantee of return. But he had something more valuable than physical strength or certainties. He had a determination forged in the fire of love. When he communicated his decision to friends and family, he met with varied reactions. Some called him crazy, others admired his courage. His mother, now elderly, held his hands, those same hands she had kissed when René was a baby, and simply said, "Go, my son. God protect you." They were the last words she ever spoke to him on this earth. In the summer of 1640, René boarded a ship in La Rochelle, bound for New France. The harbor was bustling that morning, with sailors shouting orders, merchants trading cargo, and families saying farewell. The smell of salt, fish, and tar permeated the air. The sky was partly cloudy, with seagulls lazily circling above the ship's masts. The ship that would carry René across the Atlantic was a sturdy vessel, but small by today's standards, with patched sails and wood worn by salt and time. The crossing could take 6 to 8 weeks, depending on winds and storms. Many who embarked never reached their destination, victims of disease, shipwreck, or pirate attacks. René carried only a small bundle of clothes, his surgical instruments carefully wrapped in cloth, a rosary that had belonged to his mother, and a worn copy of the New Testament. He needed nothing more. His true luggage was invisible, years of study, a heart overflowing with love, an unshakable faith. The first days at sea were terrible. René, like most passengers, suffered from violent seasickness. The ship constantly pitched and groaned, rising and falling with the waves. The air below deck was suffocating, heavy with the smell of sweaty bodies, vomit, and spoiled food. He could barely keep any food down, but even while sick, René did not remain inactive. As soon as he felt minimally able, he dragged himself around the deck to care for the other passengers. There were children with fever, adults with dysentery and festering wounds. With rationed water and limited resources, he did what he could, cleaned wounds with salt water, offered words of comfort, and prayed with those who feared dying before seeing land again. During those long weeks, René had much time to think and pray. He stayed on deck whenever possible, observing the immensity of the ocean that stretched in all directions. It was terrifying and yet majestic, that blue expanse that seemed endless, where the sky and the sea merged at the horizon. At night, when the stars filled the firmament with a clarity he had never seen on land, René felt simultaneously small and part of something infinitely vast. He talked with other passengers when his energy allowed. There were fur traders seeking fortune, colonists hoping to start a new life, and soldiers sent to reinforce the colony's defenses. And there were other missionaries, solemn-faced Jesuits, a jovial Franciscan, even a courageous nun going to establish a hospital in Quebec. In these conversations, René began to get a clearer sense of what awaited him. New France was not like the France he knew. It was a vast, largely unexplored territory, covered by forests so dense that the sunlight barely reached the ground. It was inhabited by diverse indigenous peoples, some friendly to the French, others hostile. It was a place where winter could kill an unprepared man in a matter of hours, where bears and wolves were real threats, and where the distance between life and death was measured in inches of preparation and luck. But that is where God is calling, René thought. That is where he needs me. After 7 weeks of travel, when despair was beginning to overtake some passengers, the cry came from the mast, "Land ahoy!" René rushed to the deck with the rest of the crew and saw, on the horizon, a dark line rising from the sea. His heart pounded. New France, the new world, his new home. The ship entered the St. Lawrence River, and the landscape began to change. The riverbanks were covered by primordial forests, immense trees that seemed to touch the sky. The water was so clear they could see fish swimming in the depths. The air had a different smell, clean, green, wild. Quebec, when they finally arrived, was little more than a cluster of wooden structures surrounded by defensive palisades. There was a fort, a small but solidly built church, and warehouses for the fur trade. The inhabitants, French, converted Indians, and mixed-race people, watched the ship with interest. New colonists always brought news from Europe, letters from distant relatives and necessary goods. René stepped off the ship, with legs wobbly from disuse, but with eyes shining with anticipation. He had arrived. Now, the real adventure began. René was quickly assigned to accompany the Jesuit missionaries working among the Hurons, an indigenous nation living in the Great Lakes region. The journey from Quebec to Huronia, as the French called that territory, was an ordeal in itself. Weeks of travel in birch-bark canoes, paddling against currents, portaging canoes across muddy trails to bypass waterfalls, sleeping on damp ground, eating only sagamité, a corn mush that was the basis of the local diet. René did all this with silent determination. His delicate hands developed calluses from paddling. His weak shoulders grew stronger from carrying supplies. His pale skin, unaccustomed to so much sun, burned and then tanned. He was transforming himself, adapting, becoming part of that new world. The Hurons initially received him with distrust. They were a proud people with ancient traditions, complex hierarchies, and a rich culture that the French were only beginning to comprehend. They lived in longhouses, impressive structures that could house several families, with fires in the center and sleeping platforms along the sides. The smell inside these cabins was intense. Smoke, sweaty bodies, cooking food, curing hides. But René had something that quickly broke down the barriers of distrust: his healer's hands. When a child fell ill with a high fever, they sought out the skillful Frenchman. René examined the boy, identified the symptoms of an infection, applied cold compresses, administered herbal tea, and stayed awake all night monitoring the fever. By dawn, the fever had broken. The boy's mother looked at René with tears in her eyes and uttered words he did not yet understand, but whose meaning was clear: gratitude. From that moment on, René became Ahonon, which meant something like the one who heals in the Huron language. He learned basic words: ahon, goodbye; yaho, hello; chionk, water. He observed the local healers, respecting their methods while discreetly applying his own. He discovered that the Hurons had deep knowledge of medicinal plants that did not exist in Europe. He learned from them about the healing power of willow bark, about roots that relieved pain, about rituals that, although wrapped in superstition, contained cores of practical wisdom. The work was incessant. In the summer there were hunting and work injuries. In the autumn they prepared for winter by storing medicine and food. In the winter, when the cold was so intense that breath froze in the air, respiratory diseases proliferated. In the spring, when the thaw arrived, came accidents in the icy torrents and the resurgence of fevers. René attended everyone without distinction. Old warriors who had taken enemies' scalps, women giving birth for the first time, children with large, curious eyes, converts who asked him to pray while he treated them, non-converts who tolerated his prayers because they trusted his hands. At the same time, he served as indispensable support for the Jesuit missionaries. Father Jean de Brébeuf, a man of gigantic stature and proportional courage, depended on René to maintain his health. Father Isaac Jogues, who would become his closest companion, found in René not just an assistant, but a true friend. Isaac Jogues was a remarkable man. French like René, but of a different temperament. More outgoing, bolder in his preaching, more inclined to directly challenge the pagan beliefs of the Hurons. A deep friendship developed between René and Isaac, the kind that is born when two men share not only work, but purpose, not only hardships, but faith. They talked during the long winter nights when the wind howled outside the longhouses and the fire crackled low. Isaac spoke about theology, the mysteries of faith, and his dreams of converting entire nations. René listened, contributed practical observations, and shared his own simpler but no less profound reflections. They prayed together, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in French, sometimes simply in shared silence. "You know, René," Isaac whispered one night, "God doesn't measure holiness by the titles we carry, but by the purity with which we love." René smiled in the dark. "That is what I hope, Father. That is what I hope." But not everything was peaceful work and gradual conversion. New France existed in a constant state of tension, in an undeclared but very real war between the indigenous nations allied with the French, mainly the Hurons, and the powerful Iroquois Confederacy. The Iroquois were formidable warriors. 5 nations united in a confederacy that dominated vast territories in what are today the states of New York and Pennsylvania. They were skilled military strategists, astute negotiators when it suited them, and relentless enemies when they chose war. They had developed a deadly rivalry with the Hurons, fueled by centuries of territorial disputes, blood feuds, and competition for the lucrative European fur trade. For the French missionaries and assistants, the Iroquois represented constant danger. Ambushes frequently occurred on the trails, hunting parties disappeared, messengers were captured, and everyone knew what happened to prisoners. Ritual torture that could last for days, slow death, sometimes forced adoption into the tribe as substitutes for fallen warriors. René heard these stories with growing apprehension. He saw the marks on the survivors, mutilated fingers, burn scars, eyes that had seen horrors words could not describe. He knew that as a Frenchman allied with the Hurons, he was also a target. But fear never paralyzed him. It simply made him pray more, to trust more deeply. In the spring of 1642, the situation rapidly deteriorated. Iroquois war parties began appearing with increasing frequency near the missions. They killed several Hurons in ambushes. They burned cornfields. The tension was palpable. Even inside the longhouses, conversations were dominated by defense strategies, accounts of attacks, and speculation about what would come next. It was in this context that the Jesuit superior decided to send Isaac Jogues, René Goupil, and a group of Huron converts back to Quebec to seek essential supplies. The journey would be dangerous, but necessary. The missions desperately needed flour, salt, tools, and medicine. and they needed to send reports back to France, keeping alive the connection with the civilized world. The group departed on a grey day in August. There were 40 people in several canoes, the 2 Frenchmen, converted Hurons, and some warriors for protection. They paddled downstream, tense but hopeful. If they could reach Quebec, they might return with supplies before winter closed the rivers. But the Iroquois were waiting. The attack came suddenly, at a bend in the river where the forest grew dense to the edge. Suddenly, the air was filled with war cries, whistling arrows, and the sound of cracking wood. Iroquois warriors, painted for battle and armed with clubs, axes, and knives, emerged from the trees like materialized ghosts. The canoe carrying René and Isaac was one of the first attacked. René saw a Huron beside him fall with an arrow in his chest. He saw the water turn red with blood. He heard screams of agony mingling with the war cries. It was chaos, it was terror, it was all happening too fast to process. Isaac yelled to René, "Paddle! To the shore!" But it was too late. Iroquois warriors were already in the water, overturning canoes, dragging off prisoners. Strong hands grabbed René, pulled him from the canoe, and threw him into the shallow water. He tried to get up, but a blow to the head knocked him down. He saw stars. He felt warm blood trickling down his face. Rough hands lifted him, tying his wrists so tightly that the circulation was cut off. Around him, the same was happening to others. Some Hurons were killed immediately. Others were captured. Isaac was also bound, his face showing not fear, but a grim determination. The Iroquois gathered the prisoners. There were about 20 survivors of the capture. The victorious warriors danced and shouted, displaying the scalps they had taken. The chief of the group, a tall man with ritual scars on his chest, examined the prisoners with calculating eyes. The 2 Frenchmen clearly interested him especially. Then began the first stage of the martyrdom. The Iroquois had elaborate rituals for treating prisoners. It was not mere cruelty. It was part of their culture, a way to absorb the strength of their enemies, to avenge their own dead, and to demonstrate courage in both captors and captives. They tore out René's fingernails one by one. The pain was indescribable, a burning agony that shot up his arms and exploded in his head. René clenched his teeth so hard he thought they would break, but he did not scream. He would not give them that satisfaction. Instead, he whispered between trembling lips, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." Isaac was also being tortured. They could hear each other. They could see each other through the crowd of warriors. And in those exchanged glances, there was a communication that transcended words. Resist, hold the faith, we are not alone. After the nails came blows with sticks, burns with embers, superficial cuts that bled but did not kill. The Iroquois were experts at inflicting maximum pain without causing immediate death. They wanted the prisoners to live to suffer more. The journey to the Iroquois village lasted several days. They walked during the day, barefoot over rocky trails. At night, they were tied up so that they could barely sleep. They received only scraps of food. René felt his body breaking down under the combination of pain, hunger, and exhaustion. But something extraordinary was happening inside him. Amidst that atrocious suffering, René felt a peace that defied all logic. It was as if, having finally found the cross he was destined to bear, all fear had vanished. It was not indifference to pain. Every wound hurt terribly. But it was a profound acceptance, a union with the suffering Christ that made the unbearable bearable. Isaac noticed this. "René," he whispered during one of the few opportunities they had to talk, "you are shining." René smiled faintly, his cracked lips bleeding with the movement. "It is not me, Father. It is him in me." When they finally arrived at the Iroquois village, near what is now Oryville, New York, they were greeted with a mixture of celebration and hostility. The entire village, men, women, children, came out to see the prisoners. They formed 2 lines, creating a gauntlet, and the prisoners were forced to run between them while being struck, spat upon, and cursed. René ran the best he could with his wounded feet and exhausted body. He felt clubs striking his back, stones hitting his head, hands pulling his hair. He fell several times, got up, fell again. When he finally reached the end of the gauntlet, he could barely stand. The village was large, with dozens of longhouses surrounded by impressive palisades. Fires burned constantly. There was a strong smell of smoke, curing hides, cooking food. Dogs barked. Children ran between the cabins. There was a disturbing normalcy to the place. Families living their lives, women working, men making arrows, children playing, while prisoners were systematically tortured. René and Isaac were placed in a guarded cabin. The conditions were miserable. Cramped space, no natural light, cold and damp floor. They received water only occasionally and hardly any food. Their wounds were starting to fester. René, with his medical knowledge, knew that if the infection spread, they would slowly die of sepsis. But even there, amidst that misery, they continued to be priests and medics in spirit. Isaac heard confessions from the other Huron prisoners. René cleaned wounds as best he could with dirty water and rags torn from his own clothing. They prayed the rosary together, using small stones in place of beads. They sang hymns softly, bringing fragments of beauty to that hell. The days dragged on in a horrible routine. Periodically, they were brought out for more public tortures. The Iroquois lit fires and forced the prisoners to hold embers or placed glowing axes against their skin. René saw his already mutilated fingers being burned. He felt his skin crackle and the sickening smell of burning flesh, his own flesh. During these tortures, something remarkable happened. René began to look into the eyes of his torturers, and instead of hatred, he felt compassion. He saw in them not monsters, but men imprisoned by their own traditions of violence, men who had never heard of forgiveness, of mercy, of a love that transcended vengeance. He discreetly began to do what he could to evangelize. When an Iroquois woman approached out of curiosity, he smiled despite the pain. When children came to look at the strange French prisoner, he made friendly gestures. When warriors questioned him about his faith, he explained through the few signs and words they could both understand. And he did something else. He prayed constantly for his captors. He prayed for the warriors who had tortured him. He prayed for the women who spat on him. He even prayed for the children who were taught to hate the strangers. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," he repeated in the silence of his heart, echoing Christ's words on the cross. It was on one of those nights, when René was in a state between wakefulness and unconsciousness due to the day's tortures, that the event occurred that would seal his fate. An Iroquois child, a boy perhaps 5 or 6 years old, was sick in a nearby longhouse. René could hear his groans of pain through the walls. His medic's heart ached upon hearing that suffering. He wanted to help, but he was trapped, powerless, constantly watched. But during one of those watches, when the guards' attention was more relaxed, they brought the child near where René was being held. Perhaps the mother had heard that the French prisoner had healing powers. Perhaps it was simple coincidence. But there was the child, small body burning with fever, eyes half closed, breathing labored. René looked around. The guards were distracted. He moved slowly, ignoring the pain in his mutilated body, and approached the child. He examined him with trained eyes. It was a high fever, possibly malaria or some infection. There wasn't much he could do without medicine, but he could at least offer comfort. And then, in an impulse of love that surpassed any consideration of self-preservation, René did something that would change everything. He slowly raised his wounded hand, fingers mutilated and burned, and discreetly traced the sign of the cross on the child's forehead. It was a gesture of blessing, of consecration, of love. To René, it was simply offering that innocent soul to God, asking divine protection over him. But he was being watched. An Iroquois warrior saw the gesture. He did not understand that it was a blessing, nor did he understand that it was motivated by compassion. To him, the Frenchman was performing magic on the child, casting a spell, using his foreign powers in a dangerous way. And among the Iroquois, sorcery was considered a grave crime, punishable by immediate death. The warrior shouted. Others turned around. In seconds, René was violently dragged away. They threw him onto the ground. Accusations were yelled in a language he barely understood, but the meaning was clear from the fury on their faces. Isaac, in the nearby cabin, heard the commotion, and his heart sank. He knew what this meant. The village elders were quickly summoned. There was a heated discussion. Some argued that the prisoner should be kept alive longer for more ritual torture. Others insisted that sorcery demanded immediate execution. Those who advocated for execution won. The sentence was pronounced death. René, kneeling on the ground, understood without needing translation. He saw in the eyes of the surrounding warriors that his moment had arrived. And in that instant, instead of terror, he felt a wave of gratitude. Finally, he could offer everything. Finally, he could complete the sacrifice he had been preparing since he left France. He turned toward where he knew Isaac was imprisoned and shouted in his direction, "Father, forgive me my sins." Isaac, bound and helpless to intervene, cried out loudly. With a voice broken by emotion, he proclaimed the absolution, "Ego te absolvo ab omnibus peccatis tuis in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen." René whispered, "Thank you." Then he turned to his executioners, to those who were about to take his life, and said in French, knowing they would not understand the words, but hoping they would sense the sincerity, "I forgive you. God bless you." It was late afternoon when they led René out of the village. The sky was stained with pink and orange, soft colors that contrasted starkly with what was about to happen. There was a clearing, a place where they executed prisoners deemed dangerous or offensive. René was pushed to the center of the clearing. His legs could barely support him anymore after weeks of torture. His body was a mass of wounds, burns, and mutilated fingers. But his eyes remained clear. Eyes that had seen unimaginable suffering, yet had not lost their capacity to love. The warrior designated for the execution approached. He was a young man, perhaps René's age, with war paint on his face and a tomahawk, an Iroquois war axe, in his hand. There was a hint of reluctance in his movements. Perhaps he secretly admired the prisoner's courage. Perhaps he was simply performing his duty without particular pleasure. René knelt. They had not asked him to kneel. It was his choice. He wanted to be in a position of prayer when he died. He closed his eyes for a moment, not out of fear, but out of reverence. In his mind, images of his life flashed quickly. The France of his childhood, his mother's face, the studies to become a Jesuit, the years as a surgeon, the Atlantic crossing, the faces of the Hurons he had healed. Isaac as his faithful friend, the Iroquois child over whom he had traced the cross. He opened his eyes again. He looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear, and he whispered his last words on this earth, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." The tomahawk descended. It was quick, a blow to the back of the head. René collapsed instantly. There was no prolonged agony. God's love granted him a relatively swift death, a final gift of mercy. His body remained there for some time where it fell, blood spreading over the earth, staining the fallen leaves. The warrior who executed him wiped the tomahawk clean and walked away silently. The village gradually returned to its nightly routine. Fires were stoked, meals were prepared, children were put to bed. Life continued, indifferent to the fact that a saint had just been born into eternity. Isaac, in the cabin where he was imprisoned, knew what had happened. He had felt it. He wept silently in the darkness, but his weeping was not of despair. It was a strange mixture of pain for the loss of his friend and joy in the certainty that René was now face to face with the God he had loved so completely. "First martyr of New York," Isaac whispered. "René, you did it. You gave everything." René's body was eventually discarded, thrown into a place the Iroquois used to dispose of the dead who did not merit an honorable burial. He had no funeral, no gravestone, and none of the honors the dead normally receive. But that did not matter. René did not need monuments of stone. His true tomb would be built in the hearts of all those who heard his story throughout the following centuries. Isaac Jogues survived Iroquois captivity for a few more months before managing to escape with the help of the Dutch. He returned to France briefly, where he recounted the story of René Goupil in moving detail. The Jesuit relations, annual reports the Jesuits sent from New France, documented the martyrdom with reverence. News of René's death gradually spread through Christendom, not with the speed of modern communication, but slowly through handwritten letters, verbal accounts, and sermons. Everyone who heard the story felt something stir inside them. A surgeon who was never a priest, who died blessing a child. There was something profoundly moving about that simplicity. But it was not just words that kept René's memory alive. Accounts of miracles began to emerge. A Jesuit missionary, gravely wounded in an ambush years after René's martyrdom, prayed asking for his intercession. He reported feeling a comforting presence, as if invisible hands were treating his wounds. He survived against all odds. A woman in Quebec, mother of 6 children, became seriously ill with a fever that doctors could not control. In despair, the family prayed a novena asking for the intercession of René Goupil, the holy medic. On the 9th day, the fever suddenly broke. The woman recovered completely and lived for 30 more years. A young seminarian in Paris, discouraged and ready to abandon his vocation, read about René in a biography of Jesuit martyrs. Something in the words touched his heart. He prayed, "Saint René, if you wish me to continue, give me a sign." That very night, he vividly dreamed of a man with gentle hands who told him, "Do not give up. You are needed." The seminarian continued, was ordained, and served faithfully for 40 years. Stories like these multiplied over the decades and centuries. They were not all dramatic cures or miraculous salvations. Many were simple, people finding courage in difficult moments, nurses feeling a renewal of compassion, patients finding peace in the face of suffering. But all pointed to one truth: René continued serving even after death. Over time, as happens with many saints, pious legends began to grow around the figure of René Goupil. Not all could be historically verified, but all expressed profound spiritual truths about the impact of his life and death. One of the most persistent legends arose among the hunters and fur traders who worked in the region where René was martyred. They recounted that on certain autumn nights, when the mist rose from the rivers and covered the forests with a white veil, it was possible to see a figure walking silently among the trees, always described as a man dressed in white or brown, moving with purpose, but without haste, disappearing when anyone tried to approach. French Catholics interpreted these visions as apparitions of Saint René, continuing his missionary walk even after death. The Iroquois, who converted to Christianity in later generations, had a slightly different interpretation. They said it was the spirit of the holy man they had killed, now serving as the protector of those who wandered the forests, a form of redemption. There were hunters who swore that when lost in the dense forests, they followed a gentle light that guided them back to the trail. Upon arriving safely, they looked back, and the light had vanished. "It was Saint René," they said. "He still looks after travelers." Another legend spoke of a mysterious perfume, the scent of balm, medicinal herbs, and something indefinable yet pleasant. that inexplicably arose in places associated with the martyrdom. People visiting what was believed to be the execution site reported sensing this aroma on windless days, with no natural explanation. It was interpreted as a sign of René's continuous spiritual presence. A particularly moving story came from an Iroquois family that converted to Christianity in the 1680s, 40 years after the martyrdom. The family matriarch, already elderly, told the missionary priest that when she was a child, she had seen the Frenchman with wounded hands make the sign of the cross over another child. It was that gesture that had caused his death. She said that in that moment, even without understanding the meaning, she had felt she was witnessing something sacred. That memory had remained with her over the years, and when she finally heard the Christian message decades later, it was that gesture of love and sacrifice that convinced her to convert. "He died blessing," she told the priest. "A man who dies blessing cannot serve evil spirits. He served the Creator." René Goupil's canonization process was long, as these processes generally are. He was not beatified until 1925, nearly 300 years after his martyrdom. Canonization came in 1930, when Pope Pius V proclaimed him a saint, along with 7 other North American martyrs, collectively known as the North American Martyrs or Canadian Martyrs. But René's significance transcended official titles. He became a symbol of something profoundly important, that holiness is not exclusive to priests, bishops, or founders of religious orders. Holiness is available to anyone who chooses to love without reservation. René never preached eloquent sermons. He never wrote theological treatises. He never founded institutions. He never performed miracles during his lifetime, as far as we know. He was simply a medic who cared well for the sick, a friend who was faithful, a believer who maintained his faith even when everything was collapsing. And that is precisely what made him so beloved. Ordinary people could see themselves in him. Nurses working double shifts in hospitals could look at René and think, "He understands." And parents caring for sick children could invoke his intercession, knowing he understood the weariness of caregiving. People going through terrible trials could remember that René suffered worse things and still kept his heart gentle. He became the special patron of anesthetists, nurses, and all health professionals. There is something appropriate about this. The man who offered physical relief in life now intercedes for those who continue that mission. Catholic hospitals around the world have chapels dedicated to him. Nursing colleges celebrate his feast day. Missionary doctors invoke his name before difficult procedures in remote areas. In Orisville, New York, the probable site of his martyrdom, a shrine was erected. It is not a grand structure like European cathedrals, but it has an appropriate simplicity. Pilgrims come there, especially on September 29th, his feast day. They walk through the same forests where René walked. They look upon the Mohawk River that witnessed so much suffering and sacrifice. They pray, "Saint René," their prayers say, "You who knew pain, intercede for us who suffer. You who kept the faith, strengthen our faith. You who loved until the end, teach us how to love." More than 3 centuries and 80 years separate our time from René Goupil's martyrdom. The world has changed in ways he could never have imagined. Medicine has advanced beyond recognition. The forests where he walked have been largely cut down. The indigenous nations he encountered faced genocide, displacement, but also resilience and renewal. The Church itself has undergone profound transformations, but some truths remain eternally relevant, and René embodies them all. First, he teaches us that broken vocations can become redeemed callings. René wanted to be an ordained Jesuit. His frail body prevented it. Many would have grown bitter, feeling that God had rejected them. René simply found another way to serve. How many of us carry the weight of broken dreams, of plans that did not materialize? René whispers across the centuries, "Did your plans fail? Ask God what his plan is. It might be even better." Second, he teaches us that holiness does not require grand stages. René was never famous in life. He died obscurely, discarded, seemingly wasted. But every act of love, every wound treated with compassion, every whispered prayer was building something eternal. We live in a culture obsessed with visibility, metrics, measurable impact. René reminds us that God counts differently. A child blessed in the dark can mean more than sermons preached to thousands. Third, he teaches us about the transformative power of forgiveness. René was tortured, mutilated, and humiliated. He had every human right to hate his torturers. Instead, he forgave them, prayed for them, and blessed them even in death. It was not weakness. It was strength beyond human strength. And this strength eventually changed hearts. The Iroquois, who massacred missionaries in the 1640s, had many converts and even saints of their own by the 1700s. Seeds of forgiveness take time to germinate, but yield eternal harvests. Fourth, he teaches us that physical care is spiritual work. René was a medic. He treated wounds, administered medicines, and cleaned sick bodies. He did not separate this from his faith. For him, it was his faith made tangible. Health professionals today, working in crowded hospitals, rural clinics, or war zones, can see in René a saint who understands. Every injection given, every dressing changed, every hand held can be a prayer. Fifth, he teaches us that martyrdom is not always dramatic. Yes, René died violently, but his true martyrdom began long before, on the day he chose to leave security for mission, comfort for service, a long life for purpose. Martyrdom is dying to oneself, daily. It is choosing love when it would be easier to choose indifference. It is continuing to serve when no one notices or appreciates it. Today, if you visit Orisville on a quiet day, you can walk the trails that cut through the forests around the shrine. Birds sing, the wind whispers through the leaves, the river continues to flow, indifferent to time. And if you close your eyes and listen with your heart, you can almost sense the presence of something, someone, sacred. René Goupil is not trapped in the past. His story is not a dusty relic of a less enlightened age. He is a living presence in the communion of saints, an active worker in the invisible yet real kingdom of the Spirit. Every time a nurse serves with extra compassion, René is there. Every time someone forgives the unforgivable, René smiles. Every time wounded hands still reach out to bless, René recognizes the gesture. There are hospitals on 5 continents that bear his name. There are children named René in his honor. There are reliquaries holding fragments of bones that suffered unimaginable tortures, but are now venerated. There are prayers rising daily, asking for his intercession. There are miracles, small and great, attributed to his continuing action. But perhaps his greatest miracle is this, that a man who died, considered weak, defeated and wasted, proved to be stronger than his killers, more enduring than empires, and more influential dead than most people alive. The warring tribes that killed him have vanished from history. The missionaries he supported have multiplied. The love he offered still echoes. René Goupil lived only 34 years. He served as a missionary for only 2. He was a martyr for just 40 days. But in that compressed time, he lived a life so completely given over, so pure in its purpose, that generations still drink from his source. If you are weary of serving, invoke René. If you are tempted to give up because your gifts seem too small, remember René. If you are suffering and wondering if there is meaning in pain, look to René. If you are facing your own torturers, be they illness, persecution, or tragedy, and wonder if you can forgive, ask René to lend you his strength. He was just a medic, just a layman, just a man with broken dreams and frail health, just someone who chose to love when it would have been wiser to protect himself, just a fool for Christ who discovered that the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of men. And he continues walking in the spiritual forests where he now serves. He continues healing, although now the wounds are of the soul. He continues blessing, although now from the other side of the veil. He continues whispering to discouraged hearts, "Don't give up. You are loved. It is worth it. Continue." Saint René Goupil, first martyr of New York, patron of nurses, example of humble holiness. Pray for us. Teach us to love without reservation, to serve without calculation, to forgive without limits, to die daily so that Christ may live in us. And when we finally cross the river that separates time from eternity, when we finally see face to face the one you loved so completely, perhaps you will be there too, with your hands finally healed, with your gentle smile, saying what you always said, "Do not be afraid. You are home now. Welcome." Prayer. O glorious Saint René Goupil, humble servant of God and generous martyr of the faith, who offered your life in the forests of New France out of love for Christ, I invoke you with confidence and devotion. You, who knew the pain of the body and the anguish of suffering, intercede for me in this moment of need. Holy medic of wounded hands that never stopped healing, you who cared for the sick with infinite tenderness, even amidst the greatest trials, obtain for me from God the grace to serve with love and compassion those who suffer around me. Teach me to see the very face of Christ in every person who needs care. You who forgave your torturers and blessed even at the final moment, grant me the strength to forgive those who have hurt me, and the courage to love even when everything seems lost. Saint René, patron of nurses, doctors, and health professionals, protect all those who dedicate their lives to caring for the sick, give them wisdom to heal, patience to console, and faith to persevere in difficult moments. Also obtain for me the grace I ask of you today with faith. State your petition here. May your example of humble holiness inspire me to live each day as an offering to God, transforming even the smallest gestures of love into prayer. Saint René Goupil, first martyr of New York, pray for us. Amen. My prayer. O Lord our God, in deep gratitude we lift up our hearts to thank you for the gift of life and the privilege of carrying forward your love through the stories that inspire and transform us. We thank you, Father, for granting us the strength, wisdom, and courage to share the teachings of your gospel through this channel, which has been a beacon of hope and light amidst the adversities of the world. Lord, we recognize that every life is a precious gift, and we are grateful for every moment granted to us to witness and propagate your word. May every story told, every message of faith, and every divine teaching reach hearts thirsty for love, truth, and reconciliation. We thank you for the inspiration that guides us, for the blessings that multiply, and for the opportunity to contribute to the dissemination of Christianity, bringing the light of your love to those who seek direction and solace. Through these narratives, may we touch lives, strengthen faith, and create a community united in the search for the peace and truth that only you can offer. May your grace continue to enlighten us, and may we be instruments of your mercy and compassion, reflecting the beauty of your love in every word and gesture. In the name of Jesus, our Savior, we thank you for allowing us to participate in this sacred mission. Amen. The story of Saint René Goupil ends in 1642, but his message remains alive and vibrant today. Every detail of this extraordinary narrative carries lessons that transcend the centuries and directly touch the heart of anyone seeking to live a life with purpose and meaning. René was not a superhero. He possessed no special powers, nor was he born destined for greatness. He was just an ordinary man with a frail body and weakened health who faced the rejection of his greatest dream when he was deemed unsuitable for priestly ordination. How many people today carry the weight of broken dreams, of closed doors, of plans that collapsed? René's story whispers a liberating truth. God wastes no disappointment, no tear, no interrupted path. Everything can be redeemed and transformed into something even more beautiful. This saint teaches us that holiness is not the exclusivity of popes, bishops, or founders of religious orders. It is not the privilege of those who preach to crowds or perform spectacular miracles. Holiness is within reach of everyone who chooses to love without reservation, to serve without calculation, to forgive without limits. It is in the nurse who works a double shift because her patients need her. It is in the caregiver who cleans wounds with tenderness. It is in the mother who spends sleepless nights beside a sick child. It is in every gesture of love offered when it would be easier to protect oneself. René's martyrdom carries a paradoxical beauty that challenges our human understanding. How can someone bless those who torture them? How is it possible to forgive those who tear out your nails, burn your skin, and prepare your execution? The answer lies in a truth our modern culture has forgotten. True love is not a fleeting feeling but a daily decision. René decided to love. He decided to forgive. He decided to see in his torturers not monsters, but souls created in the image of God who had not yet known the light of the gospel. And it was exactly this decision, repeated until his last breath, that transformed a seemingly meaningless death into an eternal victory. The axe that descended upon his head that September afternoon did not end his story. It merely truly began it. Today, almost 400 years later, René continues serving, continues healing, continues inspiring. Hospitals bear his name, nurses invoke his protection, people in suffering find solace in his intercession. The life of Saint René Goupil confronts us with essential questions. What are we willing to offer for what we love? How do we respond when our plans fall apart? Can we forgive those who have deeply hurt us? Do we see our daily work, however humble, as an offering to God? Are we willing to bless even when it would be easier to curse? This saint of the wounded hands, which never stopped healing, now extends those same hands to everyone watching this video. To the weary, he offers renewal. To the disillusioned, he offers hope. To those who suffer, he offers companionship. To those who care for others, he offers strength. To all, he offers the testimony that a life lived in love is never wasted, even if the world does not understand, even if no one applauds, even if it ends in apparent defeat. If this story has touched your heart, if you felt that René Goupil has something to say to your life, do not keep it just to yourself. Subscribe to the Sacred Stories channel to continue discovering powerful testimonies of faith that transformed the world. Leave a like on this video, as this helps bring this message of hope to many more people who need to hear it. Share it with friends, family, with that person you know is going through difficult trials and needs inspiration. And now a question for reflection. Leave your answer in the comments. What moment in the story of Saint René Goupil most touched your heart, and why? Was it his courage in the face of torture? His ability to forgive? The gesture of blessing the child even knowing it would cost him his life? Or perhaps his determination to serve despite being rejected for ordination? Share your impressions, as every comment enriches our community of faith and helps us grow together. And before you go, be sure to watch one of the videos that appears above, chosen especially for you. Every saint's story we tell is a seed of inspiration, a light lit in the darkness, an invitation to live with more courage, more love, more purpose. Continue this journey of discovery with us. May Saint René Goupil intercede for all who watched this video, for all who heal, for all who suffer, for all who seek to live with authenticity and love. May his wounded hands, now glorified, bless every viewer and lead them ever closer to the heart of God.